Welcome to Fighters Drinking Coffee. Today, we are going to be talking about games and rule sets. This is an episode from the archives, actually, and hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, rock and roll. So I'm a competitive person. It's a big part of who I am. So for me, competing is it's a natural progression for me, like a thing. It's what I like to do. It's like it's what got me into jiu-jitsu.
You wrestled, you fought MMA, you've done a bunch of jiu-jitsu tournaments, right?
Yeah. So that was always my goal getting into jiu-jitsu. So for me, that's the pathway, right? Like I didn't do this just to learn jiu-jitsu. I did it with the mindset of competing. It was kind of a thing to backfill after getting injured in wrestling. So that was that's what brought me there. I was like, oh, I'm going to do this thing, do MMA, compete now. So, that was my thought process, which I know is not the same for everyone. Some people get into it for different reasons. But I think that is for me, it's a big part of jiu-jitsu and kind of progressing, getting better.
Yeah, dude. It's funny, when I started doing this, I compete a ton now, and I have for about 10 years, pretty high level. When I first started, ironically, to draw a contrast, I started off just wanting to learn, and then as I did it, I guess the question emerged: am I any good at this? I was doing pretty good on the mat, sparring in class, and I came in pretty little. I was like 130 pounds or whatever. This is forever. 20 years ago. Yeah, way back in
the days of skinny Scott.
Yeah, dude, exactly. But at first it was, I gained some weight. I was like, all right, I got to get my act together if I'm going to be doing this sort of thing. But yeah, that was at first I was sort of like, all right, let me just pick up this as a skill and see how it goes. And then I got from there to a point where I was like, I think I'm pretty good at this. Let's actually go find out.
Yeah, I think I think even when we initially started training together, I don't think you were competing at the time either.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was right when I decided. I was like, I really want to start competing.
Yeah, I think I
want to take that seriously.
That's kind of that's probably what really tied us together.
Yeah, we started training a ton.
We both started training a ton and competing a bunch.
You were doing 5:30 in the morning lift.
Oh, dude, I was
training. Do you remember that?
I was doing 3-a-days.
Ooh-wee.
I would train. I would do morning workouts and then probably do skill work with Sam, and then with Perdomo. And then we would go eat, shower up, come back and train again at noon, because that was usually my training session around lunchtime. And then in the evening, come back and do class. And so we'd have because we did the double classes back then. It was the back to back. So we'd come in, do I think one day was even do no gi, then do gi. And so you train, just training all day. So I had to take that somewhere. You got to go compete after that. But
after a while, it gets to where I'm doing this so much. Why am I doing this? Let's go play a game. Let's see. Am I even good at this?
Yeah,
training an awful lot.
And you can sit there and beat up the people in your own gym, but you aren't necessarily. That's not a real. Because you can learn what they do. You train with them all the time. It's why everyone gets caught in the gym. That's also why those training partners make better, is because you can go in there, train with the same people, and end up just figuring out, well, this guy this is the guard game that, training partner A plays. I know what he does. I know. And so I'll just figure out how to beat that. But that doesn't mean you're good at it. Right? You just know how to beat that person's specific quirks. And so if you really want to see if you're good at that skill or those techniques, you go and apply it to someone whose game you don't know. And so that was that's the path. That's kind of how I was able to figure out, all right, am I just figuring out what my partners do? Or am I going out there and able to apply my will and my game against anyone? And sometimes you find out yes, and then you'll go against another guy and they like completely disprove it. And then you're like, shit, I need to go learn this again. But you also get those takeaways of learning from those matches as well.
For sure. And if I can jump on that too,
absolutely.
dude, basically and I agree with your premise. I think I guess to articulate that, there's two ways to look at it, at least, or two different versions of two scenarios that you look at. And within that premise, one is sort of like, how do I deal with the known unknowns or whatever, if you want to think of it like that. I know these guys. I'm pretty good at dealing with people I know. How do I deal with unknown scenarios in a game where, as you said, I don't know what this person's going to do. Maybe some of them, you study your opponents. We can talk about that in a little bit too.
Yeah.
You should, but whatever. There's value to that in terms of being prepared.
It's not always available.
It isn't always available. So you're going to go out and you're going to be like, all right, like there's a whole group of opponents. Maybe a couple of them have some matches on Flow or YouTube. All right, let's study these guys. At least your first or second round, if you know that's the path they're going to take. And you should do that too, right? But then there's the inevitability of, all right, I'm going to face some scenarios that I probably have some general awareness of, especially if you've been training for a long time. Like you're not completely raw. However, I got to go out and, as you said, apply that imposing your will and make it your game. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the game of all of this and why it's valuable for folks.
The value of playing
take a look at
game of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And like, I think there's also, you have a little bit of that comfort zone because in the gym, you're also comfortable. There's that like knowing when I tap or this guy's going to let go or this guy's not going to rip something. So I know I have a little bit of time to work my way out. You don't know that going into a tournament, right? Like there's a lot of times where there's those opportunities and sometimes like I've done it, you tap early because something comes on so quick and you weren't thinking it was going to happen that fast, even if it wasn't all the way at that point of break, but like you're in a transition in a scramble and then all of a sudden your arm's like straight out and you're like, I got work tomorrow. I need to,
And
so like there's also a little
for
bit
my
of
life.
that.
Yeah, I understand.
So there's a little bit of that too, where like you have to know that you're out of your comfort zone and there's a little bit of preparation for not being comfortable, but you can't really prepare for that. So you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, as backwards as that is, but like being maybe not comfortable, being okay with being uncomfortable and being okay. And like some of that comes into stuff we've talked about before in like in positional training, like be in those bad positions. It's a similar concept, but sometimes that's the environment you're competing in. Sometimes that's having those unknowns. It is sometimes the bad position. Sometimes it's competing through injuries, which is another thing that we discussed too, like injury and training. And like, so you have to be ready for all these different variables you don't have in your general training room, in the gym, with your known partners, all of that. So, this is all stuff, obviously we'll get talking about. But
yeah, well, just again, my take on all that is like and this is good for a human being in life, which is just being comfortable, as you said, developing that comfort in dealing with the unknown.
Yeah.
So the unknown in quotes, like going out and facing that. And the more you compete, the easier that becomes, because that actually becomes a skill that you'll develop too. And that's what you see, like, in my opinion, with a lot of really good competitors, is that they do it so much. It may not be necessarily, there's definitely like, if there's like a Venn diagram, there's definitely a skill within the martial art that overlaps with the best competitors for sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of these guys are just really good at competing. Like they're comfortable in that scenario. They're comfortable with general ideas of how to win games, especially in combat sports, which are, pretty similar to other sports too. There's certain principles that apply, like always being on offense, confining someone to a defensive strategy or a defensive reactionary position in quotes, keeping them responding to you, managing the clock, forcing them to have to react to what you're doing versus allowing them to take the initiative, things like that. But some people who have that comfort in competition, they just do that naturally. They may not always necessarily. So you see this with like good wrestlers who come in, they've done this so many times. That's one of the really good things about like high school or, AAU wrestling, you name it, college wrestling for sure too, where these guys have competed
that
so many
American
times.
folk style, that controlling, that's high volume.
Those are the skills, right?
Yeah.
But I think I just even taking a step back, just the fact that they've just been in, like when you play that sport, when you're a wrestler, like you've just competed hundreds of times, hundreds of times.
Just especially even just high school wrestlers, you get tons of matches doing high school wrestling.
So they're just comfortable in that environment, and like they're not intimidated by being on the mat, people watching them. And yes, also the skill set of wrestling just applies so directly to jiu-jitsu that.
Well, it's score-based. It's a score-based competition.
Right. It overlaps
with
well.
A similar, like, the gotcha, the pin or the submission. Like, it's very similar in terms of the general concept of the rules.
Well, the two sports are so similar that you can literally go in with no jiu-jitsu sometimes and just be a wrestler. And like some of these guys just win entire tournaments because their ability to do that and impose that versus a guy who maybe overall knows more jiu-jitsu but doesn't know how to force someone to respond to their game. They lose.
Well, and I think a good pathway for that too is like that the rule sets of ADCC, right? Like, you see a lot more people coming from, especially in like we have the people competing up, like you have blue belts that come in, purple belts that come in, and they're beating black belts because they have the background of the competition enough to like know how to play that game. And so like having those rule sets, like the specific takedown rules, which are different from like IBJJF is definitely a little more jiu-jitsu like friendly, I guess is the better way to put it. And like, especially the way they break everything out. And like, so you have a little bit of, you're kind of forcing people to play a different game than you are in like ADCC, right? You basically have to take down and have a form of pinning to the ground, a form of control that's different than you do in IBJJF or, all these bunch of different ones. Like,
right. Yeah, I mean, and
non-points based. You've also have the non-points based ones. And so those different rule sets also play a part in who's going to succeed. Right. So like,
that's right. And when ADCC was first created, that was their mission statement, kind of like UFC 1 was like, they took that same question of what's the best style of grappling.
Yeah.
So they wrote the rules and then generated the game of because it's like a grappling tournament. It's not a jiu-jitsu tournament. As you said, the IBJJF is the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can still come in and wrestle really well and apply that, but you can also, it's more befitting for someone to pull guard and use that jiu-jitsu skill set a little bit more. You can't actually pull guard in the IBJJF without being penalized.
Yeah.
There's a different way but that goes back to what we were saying. Like they wrote the game to be like, all right, like we're going to give wrestlers, sambo fighters, you name it, judo, whatever, any form of grappling, also jiu-jitsu, of course, because they do, in a lot of ways in ADCC, make it almost like a sub-only tournament. It isn't sub-only because there are points, but they're like, look, if you're going to do that, there are penalties to saying you're going to go to your back and just pull guard. Therefore, you better find a way to score or submit this dude if you're going to make that happen. Because if you don't allow it, there are no points in the beginning of it. You're going to get a penalty for pulling guard unless the other guy initiates a takedown. You get it. Which does, it contrasts. And then depending on what game you're trying to develop a skill set around, whatever maybe your background is, like if you're coming in as a wrestler and, and the academy that you're at is more oriented towards IBJJF tournaments, local tournaments that use that skill set or that rule set perhaps, which a lot, that's probably the most common rule set.
Yeah, it's very, very common.
It's the most pervasive. And so a lot of academies will do that. But it kind of goes back to like, all right, where are we steering this group of athletes? And then how are we preparing them? And then like, if you bring a wrestler in and they're going to be doing a lot of IBJJF, you might need to say, all right, keep that wrestling, but we're going to start to adjust it more for a jiu-jitsu style tournament. Or if you're at an academy that's perhaps doing both or maybe a little more oriented towards ADCC, and because ADCC is growing a ton and it's exciting and there's money and they're doing a really good job of like
they're taking a lot of, there's more and more promotions kind of adapting that rule set as well, starting to take more pieces from there versus they might still start with like that general Jiu-Jitsu, IBJJF framework, but there's a lot of people that are starting to take bits and pieces from ADCC's rule set and apply them, especially in the no-gi side, starting to apply some of those to like help increase watchability, like some of the watchability of it, or the broad, I guess probably better wording for it is the broad appeal.
Totally. It's expanding, right?
Yeah.
So there's more tournaments now. They do regional tournaments. They do this, they do that. Like it's more out. Therefore, potentially there are more places out there academy-wise that are saying, no, we're going to go more to these ADCC tournaments because there's just more. And like you said, more other tangential organizations, are steering towards that rule set too. So there might be places where that becomes the way they train. So then maybe that same wrestler, that same dude, you're like, all right, we're not going to tweak too much, actually. We're going to give you some submission defense. We're going to keep you attacking offensively and have you become more like a catch wrestler.
Yeah.
As an example.
Yeah. I mean, that's for sure. Cause especially when it was more prevalent, the submission only tournaments.
Yeah. They had like a moment. The sub-only tournaments had a moment where they're still around. They're still kind of cool, but you like those the most?
Oh, I love those. But I mean, like, there's a part of it is like you just
gotta have a time limit, man. They become brutal to watch when nothing happens.
Well, I mean, you have some where a guy just decides to shell up for 20 minutes, right? Like he's getting crushed, but like he knows like I'll just hide everything. And so you do have to kind of there has to be some amount, either a limit or
gotta be a time limit to
some sort of and I know like you want to have that victory, but you got to have some sort of, or you have to have some sort of stalling call for the guy who's just hiding everything. Like you have to figure that out. Good rule set concept for that is PGF, where they have the short time, but they also penalize stalling on bottom. And, but so yeah, I mean, you definitely have to have that. But I love those because you can sit there and you can just grind people down, and then
which is cool. But dude, I remember going to those tournaments. The U.S. grappling guys before they stopped doing that. They used to do a bunch, and they were just on the day. Probably if you looked at the stats or something, if they even had these stats, probably most of them ended in a pretty timely fashion. But there were always those outliers that went like an hour and a half, and it's always like two heavyweights. Someone's out of shape, and like nothing happens. And there were matches that would go for like over an hour, and you're like, God, please throw a gun in there or a knife. Like, let's just end it. Someone's got to win.
But I mean, I like those because they definitely encourage that, like, it can help you train to be more aggressive and hunt those submissions. You can definitely, it's a fun game to play if you want to go out there and like hard work, look, hunt for that top position, hunt for that submission, or like, hey, I'm going to dive legs. Like, there's definitely like a fun aspect to that.
I get it.
But I mean, the person you go against matters too. Like if they're not going to play the game, then
it gets tough, man. I'm telling you, if you get it, like at a certain point for me personally, I'd say probably it's 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes where I'm like, all right, guys, like, maybe it's my attention span. Maybe it's ADD. I'm like, yo guys, like, all right, something's got to happen. Like I'm getting a little bit like sick of this.
Someone just put an arm out there.
Dude, I think,
give it away.
You know what? I think he does a good job with that is who's number one.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever watch those, but they like, it's definitely sub only, but they have judges favor a certain person. It's just simplified to a point where like, all right, someone goes submit the other guy, but if not, what we're going to do is we're going to weigh the body of your work for about, and what they'll do, like they get it down to like the sweet spot. And it's usually with like good athletes that you're actually really intrigued by the matchups where you're like Gordon Ryan versus some other guy, you name it, or whoever, just picking a name out to where you're like, all right, I'll actually watch this guy grapple for 20 to 30 minutes because it's kind of interesting. They're so good that the skill set and the strategy, it's fun to observe that and see how they approach the match. They bring in their skill set to do that too. And then it's going to end at a certain point. There's going to be a judges favored this guy. Like, yeah, there was no sub, but Mike was doing more shit. So Mike, you win.
Winner.
Like,
yeah, you were working harder. You were going for those submissions. You were playing the game better.
That's the sweet spot for me. I can't, like, at a certain point it gets where I'm like, all right, I can't do an hour and a half. You got to
have a cutoff point. But like, yeah, I mean, that's perfect because then you're encouraging that person to actually play the game, both sides of it, right?
I think they do a cash incentive too for subs. Well, so they're like, hey, please submit someone.
Yeah, you got to get that sub bonus. That always helps too.
Yeah, it does make for an entertaining product. Yeah. And that's if there were my notes on that. I get the appeal of the sub only tournaments because it's definitely more like, it's definitely more you could call it's like again UFC one. It's sort of like more like the Gracies used to talk about this shit all the time. Like, yeah, but we don't know who the best martial artist is. I'm like, I get it. That's really cool. You kind of do. Like, it's like you can merge the martial arts a little bit with the kind of the game and to an extent, like an entertainment value.
Yeah.
To that, like it makes sense. You're still gonna find out who the better martial artist, but also the better competitor is.
Yeah.
I know the rules. You're not allowing groin strikes and crazy shit. Like, whatever. UFC, Gracie's. Like, I get it, but at the same time, like, we make it happen. Speed it up a little bit.
It has to be. It's a sport. It's a spectator sport at the end of the day. Like, if you want competition to grow, people need to watch it. And so if you don't have it be exciting, then that's why a lot of people don't watch those super fights or like finals where it's like 20 minutes long. Like, that's a long time to watch something, especially if the rule set doesn't encourage. So,
it's brutal, man.
Yeah.
And then like I in my opinion, I think like we'll call it the business incentives of creating a product that people want to watch, and then their attention and their money brings opportunity. This cultivates a path for folks who want to make a career out of this, because I mean, even really now, like I don't think the type of money exists that anyone can. Well, there are some leagues out there starting to promote PGF. You mentioned they're a good one where they're throwing like legit numbers at guys to go out and win. That goes to one person. I think eventually, like I think they have $100,000 cash prize.
So they do. They do a team. So whichever team has like basically the team with the most submissions at the end of the day, and least against too. That's another part of it. It's almost like a whole different sport because they have team points and based on
and there's money for that, and those guys are making like totally. That's cool.
So they'll split money up for the whole team, and then they also have the other end of it where like you get to the individual tournament. Right. And so that guy also gets money.
Which is great. I love that. It's just, it's what my reason for bringing it up is because like, unless you're the guy who makes, probably you win some of the team money, but then you also get 100 G's for winning the whole thing. Now you're talking about money that you can live off of.
Yeah.
But like if you're not that guy, paycheck. Like, but you're still out there, you're getting paid some money. It's probably decent money for our sport, but if you're going to make a career out of just being a competitor, like you just want to be a professional athlete, you got to compete quite a bit. And especially you can't just be in one league. You got to be able to go to multiple different places where they throw a little bit of money at you, because a fairly large paycheck in this space will be probably between like 5 to like 20 G's. You can't live off of that.
Yeah.
It's good money. Like it's acceptable money.
It's good when you look at it as like, I
compared to making no money.
2 days of competition.
Totally.
But when you look at everything, like the preparation leading up to it, the people that are involved in that, like all of that, you have there's a lot of other pieces where you're not necessarily getting paid, or, I mean, if you're lucky, you have sponsors that are supporting that, and that might just be in stuff you're not spending money on. But if you are at, depending on what level you're at, you might be getting sponsors that are helping, that you're living off of. It might be a little bit, but at least it's something. But, you might have no money coming in from like, if you're competing once a month, which, some people do more, some people do less, but if you're competing once a month, and you might only be getting, sometimes you get $5,000 a month, sometimes you might get nothing.
0. Yeah.
So like there is also that. And so you have to look at the preparation side of it too, of like, it's very easy to be like, well, that guy won $100,000. Why is he not eating? It's like, well, he had to pay all these other dudes, or
got rent to pay.
Yeah. He's got to pay his rent that's been building up for the past, No,
I get it. Well, this is just my appeal
sure.
to having a good product that people want to watch, that brings eyes and money, and then justifies these organizations, their companies, their businesses. They got a business model. They need to make money if they're going to be spending it on athletes. Like, it just has to be good.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, I don't disagree.
With the tournaments or the competitions need to be like kind of entertaining, and they can't be like miserable to watch for like 90 minutes, 2 dudes.
Oh yeah, you need.
That's all I gotta say.
You definitely need some production value. But so like, I think it's something important to talk about is, we touched on how there are different rule sets, but like, how do you like preparing for those, right? Like, we both competed in a bunch of different rule sets. Like, I've had the cage grappling. I mean, MMA is, that's a whole different thing. We're not going to dive too deep into that. That's a different I mean,
It's a different
we
sport.
could talk about it a little bit.
For what it's worth, it's a different sport.
Yeah.
There actually is a career path.
Yeah.
Right? It's very difficult. And even some of the guys who get to the highest level of the UFC, they're not making life-changing money.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it exists.
Yeah,
And you're right. It's just different.
There's the preparation there, but if you just kind of boil it down to just the different rule sets within grappling, like, we've both done submission only. I've done some cage matches, like the cage grappling, wrestling matches, submission wrestling, IBJJF, and list goes on. We're not gonna name too many. But
there's a bunch. Is what
we've both prepared for different rule sets, and so let's talk a little bit about how that preparation differs. We don't have to get too much into detail for each one, but kind of maybe we can touch on a couple different pathways that we take, just kind of depending on the rule set. Like, for example, if I'm training for submission only, I'm going to be focusing on getting to top, getting to my submission. This because I'm mainly a top player. But getting to that top position, whether that's getting out, I'll practice getting out of the bad position on bottom, or sweeping from bottom, takedowns especially. I mean, that was how he would usually approach it, is I'm going to get that takedown. If I get that person on their back, I'm getting my sub. That was my progression each time. If I can get them on their back and get through their hips, they're sub. I already know that is the next step. So when I'm doing, that is my goal, on top of I'm going to get my cardio up. I want to be able to, in the nerdiest way to put it, spam those takedowns, spam those submissions, because that's what in my game is going to win me that specific rule set. Versus if I'm doing IBJJF, I'm just training for points.
I know what you're saying. Basically what we're talking about. Okay, so if on this train of thought, maybe we confine it to 3 different styles that are most common. There could be a sub only or sub only oriented tournament. Think Fight to Win or Copa Elite, for example. Who's number 1? There's ADCC rule set. We talked a little bit about that. And there's IBJJF. And there's some other stuff out there, but those are the big 3. So in any one of those spaces, you have offense and defense.
So maybe we talk a little bit about how we would do. Maybe we boil it even down to just how do you train differently, but what is constant across them. That might be the better. That way we have we don't have to talk about too deeply into all of them. So maybe I'll just start with that one. With sub only, those are things that are more specific to that one for me. But in a little bit of his, depending on the type of promotion, if it's tournament style, I might not train for as flashy of a thing. But if it's one-on-one super fight style as well, might try to put on, do something that's a little more showy, working some cartwheel,
a little more glitz and glamour, some spectacle stuff.
You can feel I'm willing to take bigger risks for that style too. When I
got one opponent, a few minutes, make it a show.
And if you lose, at least as long as you look good doing it, because there is some, if you can look good doing it, lose with some grace, and put on a good show, you're probably getting invited back.
Oh, for sure.
If you can throw that one big slam, doesn't matter if you lose. You get that sweet takedown that everyone oohs and ahs about, you might get invited back next time. Then you can continue playing this game and getting better at it.
Well, to your point. Okay, so agreed. There's we touched on it a second ago, which is there are something that it's consistent across all fighting rule sets, all game rule sets, which is offense and defense. These are general categories, and you mentioned this a moment ago. And then beneath that too, there's the raw physical attributes. You mentioned cardio, strength is another one. So on and so forth. There are these things that whether you're training for a tournament or not, there's going to be that sort of your training. All right. That's built into your training regardless. There's anytime you're on the mat, you're going to be working on your cardio, you're going to be working on your strength, you're going to be working on your tactics, your mobility, your speed, your cadence of changing speed. These are maybe more the physical attributes, and then how that applies into your offense and your defense. And that's where, because of the details for which game you're playing, IBJJF, ADCC, or other sub only, whatever, or super fight, call it what you want. Those training formats, your drills, the way you spar, you'll have to pivot a little bit in those things, but it's very similar, right? So when you look at like when you aggregate out like the time you spend on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, whatever, in your training. And I think we talked a little bit about this in one of our older episodes, just like programming, if you will. Like there's a certain template to how you want to spend your time on the mat. I know we also talked about how there's limitations to how much time you spend on the mat and like get your body banged up. But like this goes into the way you like set yourself up so that when you're looking at your year or your months and you're like, I want to do an ADCC trials tournament. I want to do IBJJF pans. I want to do, there's probably going to be a couple super fight opportunities, whether it's Copa, fight to win, whatever. I'll pack those bad boys in there too. You schedule out your time and then you think about, all right, now that I've got a list of goals and things I'm going to go do, for all of the reasons we mentioned earlier about benefiting and what you're like, hey, I want to be a competitive athlete, not just a guy who trains. The way I'm going to spend my time on the mat is now thought through. And then seasonality wise, like going into it, you're like, okay, maybe you look at the overall year and you're like, towards the end of the year, I have Nogi Pans, I have Nogi Worlds, I have X, Y, Z. All right, I might pivot my training a little bit over to that. Earlier in the year, usually there's an ADCC trials, which is in the spring. Usually that's West Coast trials. East Coast trials is usually in the fall. That's Atlantic City, you name it. And you'll think about how you're like, okay, that means 6 to 8 weeks in advance or 2 months in advance, 3 months in advance. I have to tweak my training, but only a little bit. Maybe pick slightly different training partners, work with a coach or two on like what those adjustments, what those tweaks need to be. And then going back to programming, if Monday through Saturday or Sunday or whatever, your program looks like 10 to 15 hours of training plus in that is strength and conditioning. And then the rest of your life, recovery. Anyways, like with that, you're like, okay, well, I have wrestle 4 times a week. That'll be really good for ADCC. It's also good for IBJJF. So I don't need to change that too much. I have to stick my takedowns a lot more definitively in ADCC.
You
got to flatten them out. Or that's a whole
shoulders on the mat, 3 seconds, right?
Yeah, that's right. Dude, it's a beast. But anyways, like, I have to like make my adjustments there. Okay, I do like, whatever the number of wrestling sessions is. And then I have jiu-jitsu sessions. I teach in the gi or whatever. Okay, so that's 1 hour. That's going to take a toll on my body. It won't be that bad. I got to think about that. And then my no-gi sessions, if I have a super fight sub only or ADCC, where if I'm going to win in jiu-jitsu, it has to be a little bit differently. It has to be a little more definitively, i.e. submissions, just as an example.
Yeah.
Okay, when I'm doing my jiu-jitsu training, when we do our 8 a.m. Saturday practices, let's tweak our hour that we're on the mat and make those drills a little more steered towards the submission rather than just positional grappling because of the incentive structure of the game that I'm going into. So yes.
Yeah, rather than focusing on I need to score, first to score or whatever. I mean, sometimes you still have that, but like just as an example, you might be like, all right, well, today we're going to do, you have this position, person on bottom needs to score 2, person on top needs 3 or 4, whatever. I don't know. But like, you might have that for one style, but then for another, it might be like, doesn't matter who scores. You got to get a sub. The other person gets out, then you've lost or whatever. Like you doctor your sessions. And like, I look at it a similar way. And like, you can almost like, I almost look at it like, all right, I have X number of opportunities. I have X number of sessions between now and that next thing. How am I going to allocate those? Like, especially since a lot of, with the exception of the 8 a.m.s, I have a lot more, like, I have to control 3 of those sessions. I have to dictate and program.
You're running the classes.
I'm running those sessions.
And you have a different role when you run that session too. It's a little more about your students, not about you.
Exactly. So like, you kind of have to figure out like, all right, how do I guide this in a way that when we get to the open mat portion of it, that they're going to be prepared for, or, hey, we've been working on whatever. Like right now I'm doing a lot of things. I'm preparing guys so that they have a skill set that's going to help me with
you can do
training
that.
You
can help them help you.
Yeah.
There's a way to do it where it's still beneficial for them. It's not completely
exactly.
about you. I'm with you.
You create drills that help them help you later. Yes, exactly. And so like you have to like super deep program or like, hey, I know that, a training partner who's good at something that I'm bad at is going to be here on Tuesdays. I need to
let's welcome this dude's game a little bit more than mine.
I'm going to hop on this guy on Tuesday and I'll be like, hey, just do your thing, and I'm
Hit
going
me
to try
with a
to
bunch of
stop
leg
it.
locks.
Yeah,
Hit me with a bunch of leg locks.
or hey, smash the shit out of me. I need to get out. You know, like those kinds of things where like you got to really like almost micromanage your own training, so that you get the most out of your set number of sessions. Cause like, it's not like you talked at the beginning, I was doing three sessions a day. It was very easy when you have 3 opportunities every day, 5-6 days a week to, you know, when your rest day is only doing 1. Right. You know, so it's very easy to take that and make it and you can have whatever program you want. You have so many opportunities, but when you start shrinking that down to now I have 1 a day, like now my programming has to be tighter. I almost have to like micro program, be like, all right, this is what we're going to work on while I'm teaching. And, you know, I might get a couple sets in, or just me teaching it is going to help me like focus on that skill. Like I'll get a couple reps just discussing it or showing it to someone, but like me teaching it is going to help me with thinking through it. And, you know, that knowledge pathway is going to help me prepare. But then also, how am I going to focus my roles at the end of class, or so that I'm actually working the right things to help me do the tournament.
It makes you better at time management.
Yeah.
Basically,
Oh,
which
for
is
sure.
which is a life skill,
Yeah.
by the way, and there's an overlap in overall human development there. But yes, it gets one thing I would say is that I personally think, like as I've gotten older and I've gotten more busy with other things, I like that more. I'm not in a position. Well, some days of the week I'm on the mat like 4 or 5 hours, which is kind of a lot, but whatever. And usually in that chunk of time, it's, you know, whether it's a private lesson or teaching a class, it does go back to what you said, where it's oriented towards someone other than myself. Nonetheless, there's a benefit to me when I do that, but I'm not in that position where I just take like 6 classes a night and it's for myself, mostly just to go learn. But when, to your point, when you're limited in time on the mat, whether that's because you can only recover from so much, or, you know, you're just busy, whatever. You got kids, you got stuff going on, you got a wife and kids, like you just have obligations and you only have X number of minutes or hours or whatever to do this. It makes you think about the purpose of that training.
Yeah.
And one thing I want to call out to that you mentioned earlier, which is that what I like about this competition mindset is it makes you ask those questions. And you touched upon this earlier, where you're thinking about how do I apply my skills? What's my game plan? I call it a game plan. Like, what's my game plan to win? And to your point earlier, you mentioned this, and this is what I want to talk about, which is that when you were like, all right, the way I fight, which for what it's worth, what I want to call out, this applies to all of the rule sets that we talked about.
Oh yeah.
It's like an underlying way to win. And that's another benefit of being competitors. It gets you asked the questions like, oh, how do I win this thing? What's the objective and how do I achieve an objective? That's another skill for life. But to your point, you're like, all right, I want to take someone down. And if I know I get to their hip or whatever, I'm putting myself in a position to apply my offense. And from there, I'm going to start spamming submissions.
Yeah.
Right? But with that said, and this kind of, I mentioned this earlier, like there are a ton of overlaps. What I like about everything we said, it does get you hyper specific, but at a certain point, when you take a step back, there's like a macro picture where there's like some degree of simplicity, which is like, all right, I know that at the end of the day, what I always want to do is I always want to be on top, right? I always want to be on top, which means I want to be good at wrestling, or good enough at wrestling the other guy wants to pull guard where he's allowed to, or if he's willing to take a penalty for it, cool, you gave me what I wanted. I didn't have to work for it.
I'm where I want to be already.
Right, exactly. And you did it for me. Or like I have that superiority in wrestling that if dude's a dog enough to want to fight on the feet, I'm going to win it. That's cool too. That's great. In all of those rule sets, being on top, having that wrestling superiority gives you a way to win too. While you may want to submit them, you obviously do. Like your underlying skill set that you're constantly working on across your weeks and your months. Again, you take that step back. Like, well, I'm always doing the work that involves me being in top position. So therefore, I'm always working on honing that skill. If I continually do that and put myself in a position to, like, when I coach people, I always try to, like, when I impose my worldview on them, which is like a teaching method, I do it just to like build a framework for someone to understand how these games are played. And then I'm like, hey, look, go become a leg locker if you want. You can go be a guard puller. I'm going to teach you not to, but I'm not going to tell you not to. I'm not going to tell you not to. Actually, I would welcome it if you got to a point where like that was your unique skill set and you're nasty at it. That's cool.
Well, and then you work, and then you got,
and that's a great training partner, like you said.
Yeah.
That's a compliment to the overall program, and for sure yourself, and then for other people. Like if because I also am of the same philosophy. I want to be on top, and I want to be like death from above. Air superiority is what I call it. But anyways, like in any rule set that you're in, being able to get the person down and then attack them from top position, there's a way for you, even if you're unsuccessful. These are like the tiers of the match, I say. It's like be on top, whether that means you took them down or they gave up on position. Attack the position for your guard pass, and because that involves you moving forward, by the way. Now you're on offense.
Yeah.
In the IBJJF, the referee's going to make a decision eventually. If there's no points, if there's no submissions, they're going to go with the person who is more offensive. So it's sort of like, okay, they acquiesce to bottom position. They probably have the reasons for maybe they think their submissions from the bottom are better than your attacks and defense from the top. Let's prove them wrong. Let's go put them on defense. And then if you're successful at that, you're getting points. That's why I like that. 'Cause sort of as you're working towards your position where you're going to attack your submission, you're also gaining points in the IBJJF. In theory, you're also doing that in ADCC. ADCC, yeah, it's different. The points are very difficult to get. There are actually no points in the first half of the match. The points toggle in. They do 6-minute matches for like for trials, or all of their matches at each level, whether it's trials or whether it's the ADCC like worlds. When you get into that, time limits change, but it's a halfway point to the match where they start to bring in the points at that phase in the match. If you can continue to do that, yes, that's done a little bit differently, which the positional top attacking when someone's actually on the ground. If you do that well, if you pass their guard to get to your submission point, like you're winning points is what I'm saying. So it's sort of like force the person into these tiers of the game. All right, we're going to get into the ground. If you take them down, you get points for that. If they sit down, whether it's IBJJF or ADCC, there's a way they can do that to where it penalizes them. So they have to do that correctly. Either way, it gets you to the second phase of the match. You're going to attack the guard pass. If you're unsuccessful, but you're constantly working to do that, in theory, and I'll put it this way, like if you're doing it in a way where it's clear to the referee, like I've been the one who's been attacking, this guy's been defending, but he hasn't done anything else. You should be the person who gets the victory.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen because referees fuck shit up all the time. That's okay. But like, and that's a whole other conversation. Like, that's also part of the equation. That's all another metaphor for life. Like you can do everything right and still get fucked over. That's just a whole other thing. But if you do that right too, let's say you actually successfully hit that tier of the match and like now you advance past that guard, you should be getting points for that. Okay. Now you're winning that match. Yeah. And then we're in a position now, we're going to hit them with our subs. We're going to dominate from top position. These are all also, by the way, things that overlap with the martial arts philosophy too. So there's like a tiered, baked in way where you can kind of do all of the above in a proper way. Like that's, people love to shit on the IBJJF rules all the time, and I get it. For what it's worth, what I always I have two thoughts on it. The main one is that it's kind of the de facto pro league, and like I'm just glad that we have one. Yeah, and that they're organized. Yes, they have a lot of problems. I have personally been on the receiving end of bad decisions and things like that. And I've known a lot of dudes who have too. I get it. That sucks. I don't think it's going anywhere. Hopefully that gets better. If there's some exposure, maybe some accountability, that will happen. But they're out there putting on matches. They're all over the world. Like, all right, it is what it is. Like, go do it. The second thing that I was going to say there is that the way they've built the rules is oriented towards what makes the martial, like what the fuel of the martial art, which is like get points for passing, get in a good position, and then submit people. Yeah, it like you can attack the little details and like how the referees and scoring and kind of like they make mistakes. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, but like it's the can we fix the product a little bit? For sure, product needs to be adjusted, but like it's not a bad product in my opinion.
Well, and it does a good job of like, especially it does achieve its goal. It incentivizes playing the game of jiu-jitsu. And so, that's always good. And, and yes, there's tons of different, like, there's probably a lot more that's similar between how you train and prepare for each one. Like, for the most part, it's, you gotta be dictating pace. You gotta be in a position that you're comfortable winning from. And, you gotta be the one who does whatever the goals are for that specific game, so that you are the one that comes out winning in the end. And, don't leave it up to a scoreless ref's decision.
Agreed.
As well. And then I think kind of the last thing that I want to kind of touch on with this is that the kind of, what I like to say to people who are newer to this, to jiu-jitsu, or haven't competed yet, or the competition curious. I think that everyone should compete at least just once. I think that there's a lot to gain from it, and you don't have to want to be a hardcore competitor or even be a very competitive person. But I think that there's a lot more to gain from just getting out there and competing for yourself than there is from like just training in the gym. Like there's a lot of guys, and a lot of guys that I've trained with in the past, currently I'm training with, you can see a lot more of those light bulbs, and you see a lot more of that, like, you see a lot more of people's games open up or expand, or you see them just get better just through going to competition. And that's because that stress situation is different, that you're tackling those unknowns, and you start to actually open up your game, because now you're not just beating Rob's whatever, he always pulls guard and you got to pass that, and then you pass guard and then he shells up, and now you're just sitting there doing the same thing.
Because he's your buddy in the training.
Yeah, and you just do the exact same thing over and over again, but then you go out to a tournament and the person doesn't pull guard. What do you do now? Or you don't train takedowns because your training partner doesn't like to train takedowns. And then you go and you don't know what to do at your feet. Or you're not used to the stress situation of being on bottom. And so now you have someone on top of you and you don't know what to do. You gas out and then you quit on yourself. And then you have to figure out, how do I don't want to quit on myself. And then you adapt to that. You get better, and you no longer are quitting on yourself. You're out there, and you become, even if you never compete again, you learned that day. And now you're making adjustments in your game to get better and more comfortable. And, it makes a huge difference. And, again, it doesn't have to be your primary goal with jiu-jitsu, but it does. I think that is the main, like, a really big part of, just get out there and compete, because you're going to learn something. Even if it's once, or even if you don't do well, no one's going to care. Everyone's going to be okay. They're still going to like you.
Yeah.
It's fine. Right.
Totally. That's when it comes to like talking to new people, something to your point. I agree. Obviously, like, it's two dudes you compete, so we understand the benefits, and to the extent that I don't force it on people, but I highly recommend it too, for all of the reasons you mentioned. It teaches you what you are good and not good at. That's I'll put it that way. And then what I try to encourage folks to the best of my ability, it's not easy to do. You can't get in someone's head and then control the way they think. You can encourage them or try to like steer them towards a certain outlook, but I try to get folks to like detach from the outcomes a little bit, as difficult as that is. Yeah. That's not the way people are hardwired. Yeah. Myself included. It takes a lot of work to kind of do this, but with detaching from the outcomes, and this is also something I try to like vet out with a new student who's going to go do it, is like what their psychological profile is. Like, can they handle a loss? Can they not handle a loss? How competitive are they? Because what I don't want is someone to go in not prepared and then feel like their world is crushed because they lost at a jiu-jitsu tournament. It's not that big of a deal. It really isn't. And I try to make it more like surgical. I'm like, all right, be like a surgeon here. Like, this is a game. We're going to go find out what you are good at, what you're not good at, what you know, what you don't know. And like, we will find that out. Like, it will. And it may not be exactly if you think you're like some, cause maybe you're trying to psych yourself up for the tournament a little bit. And you're like, I'm the man. Like, I'm going to go out there and this is going to be great. This is how I think it's going to go. Which every person does that. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You try to create a vision. If you can go like implement that vision, cool. Thumbs up. Like, let's go do that. Yeah. When that doesn't go your way, like, are you going to be destroyed? Is it going to impact your day, your weekend? You don't have to take an L in a good way. I'm not saying enjoy losing, but don't get like butt hurt about it and ruin your life or your week about it. Don't stop training because of it. So anyways, our job as coaches is to make them prepared for that. So the last thing I'll say on the same point is, I tell people, go watch matches, go study rule sets, go like understand how people win and lose in this game, because it is a game. Yeah. And I mentioned this earlier, but there are going to be people out there who just know how to play a game better than you. Or
doesn't
maybe
mean-
you're that person.
It doesn't mean you're bad at it.
Yeah.
It just means that they played the game better than you.
The other thing too is I'm like, what makes you think you're just gonna you've never done it before? You think
Yeah.
you're just gonna go out and be the best at it? Like, relax. Like, this is a skill. Learning how to compete is a skill, and so if you actually want to get good at that, and this is what I'd say the outcome I have for most people. Then again, I'm okay with the person to go out doing it once. It's a bucket list thing. Hey, I competed in the Jiu-Jitsu tournament. I don't ever want to do it again. But my main thing is when I go there with someone new, and I'm like, do you want to do this a second time? I would like the answer to be yes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I want to have a positive experience.
It usually is too.
A lot of times it is. A lot of times it is. But
it's
like,
addicting.
yeah, it can be. I mean, for me and you, it is. We're addicted. But yeah, and I think we also understand the benefits of it, so that's why we stick to doing it. In any case, I don't want them to be like so bent out of shape because of a bad match.
Yeah,
or like, I don't. This
we
is
talked
fucking
about
me
it.
up.
We talked about it off air, like I think recently. So we'll go back and forth, just kind of checking in on how people's competitions went, and I tell this to some of the younger guys at the gym, like someone has to lose every match. It doesn't matter. Like, it's fine. Someone has to lose. You can't both win. So it's okay to lose.
Yeah.
And
unless you're some freak athlete on the mat, or a freak athlete from another sport like wrestling, why did you think you were gonna walk into the first thing ever and be just a stud? I want you to have that confidence. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
but I also want you to temper your expectations. Part of that is kind of be a little self-aware. That's a good thing too. Yeah. Give yourself a break and let's go in and let's find some answers to questions that maybe you haven't asked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, those learning that new thing. You don't have to feel good about losing. And
who does? No one feels good about losing.
But you should feel good about how you lost.
Yeah.
And that's go out there, give it your all, do the thing that you were training to do. And if at the end of the day you didn't lose or you didn't win, that's fine. You went out there, you played your game. Heck, it could be you went out there and I want to get submissions today. And you went out there and you were hunting for submissions, but at the end of the day, you didn't get the decision. Cool. We're going to move on. We're going to do it again next time. But because there's different ways to go about that. You just 100%. Want to win, then train to win. Don't train to submit, whatever. But,
point taken.
At the end of the day, it is what it is. Prepare for different matchups. If you want to get deep into competition, you want to prepare for those specific rule sets or a specific game plan like we talked about. And, get out there, give it a shot or don't.
Talk to your coaches. Ask them questions. See if you ask them if they think you're ready for a competition too. I feel like that's
if it was us, we'd say go for it, but
some
maybe.
Right.
But yeah, definitely,
I don't think that question gets asked enough.
No.
Because like I said, I don't want someone to get butthurt about maybe they weren't ready.
Yeah.
Which I could tell you, for the most part, I know when someone is or is not ready. I don't know how much preparation you've done. And
they might even say, hey, you want to do a tournament? Cool. Let's start with
That's cool, but let's set the right expectations going into it.
Yeah.
If we went in with someone they did a fight camp and they were very prepared, all right, that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
And if someone just wants to go out on a whim and do it, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Just don't get bent out of shape if you lose.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I hope everyone got some
takeaway
from that. I know, I actually learned some things. I'm sure, we always, whenever we talk, we both pick up something new. So, so I think that's great. Get out there, compete if you want, prepare for it, have a good time. Don't care if you lose. Don't have to feel good. So yeah.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Fighters Drinking Coffee. As always, follow, subscribe, rate, review. Our Instagram is at Fighters Drinking Coffee. Follow us there. You'll find updates when episodes are released, as well as any other information. You can also join our Discord. The link will be in the episode description. And rate us 5 stars. Those 5-star ratings help us a lot and help us on the algorithm, moving us up the charts and getting us in front of more listeners so that we can grow the community around Fighters Drinking Coffee. So, bye.